Hello and welcome to another episode in our Shaping Your Success CPD channel with the Law Society of Scotland and Hay Legal. Today we are joined by Elizabeth Rimmer. Elizabeth started her career as a solicitor specialising in clinical negligence at Lee Day. Since then, she has been managing and developing charities in the health sector for over 20 years. Years later, she found herself drawn back into the legal industry in a different capacity, one that let her combine her knowledge of the law with her passion for mental health and well-being. This culminated in her current role as CEO of LawCare, which she has held since 2014. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Rachel. I'm delighted to be here.
So what I wanted to talk about, and I think a really interesting topic that we must consider when we're talking about mental health, especially in the legal sector, is the ability to switch off. And when I was sort of researching this topic, I came across quite an interesting analogy, which compared mental health, the legal sector, to a law firm having a sort of very expensive machine. So, of course, when you have this machine, you invest in its upkeep, you maintain it, you service it, and a lot of the times you even sort of switch it off. And that kind of got me thinking, for people working in this industry, I suppose their mind is the machine. But often there's little thought to taking care of it and ensuring that we sort of have this time to recuperate and switch off. And really, I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on this.
Well, I think that's a brilliant question, because you've touched on something that I think is really important for legal professionals to recognize, is that your mind, the machine, is your greatest asset in legal work. And not only for you as an individual, but firms should recognize that their greatest asset are the minds of the people that work in their business. And so looking after our minds should be a top priority, because when you think about what legal work requires, it requires clarity of mind, it requires focus, it requires judgment. It's about weighing things up in the balance and working out what steps to take. So if you've got poor mental well-being, your ability to exercise your mind and use it to its best ability is going to be compromised. And there's lots of data that shows that, particularly from the US and Australia, that lawyers with poor mental well-being will have their judgment impaired and are more likely to make poor ethical decisions. And I think that's another important aspect of this, is that legal professionals are held to very high standards of professional practice by their regulatory frameworks and bodies, particularly of honesty and integrity. So if your mental well-being is compromised, you may not make the best decisions or right decisions that could lead you down a pathway of getting into difficulty with your regulator, but also not being able to deliver and meet the expectations of your clients, because you may make a mistake or you may not give something the care and attention that it deserves. So it's really important, I think, to recognize that our minds in the legal profession are our greatest assets.
Just sort of honing in on that sort of ability to turn off. I can see that lawyers are sort of constantly dealing with people who are often at a real sort of low point in their life. And I think that's the same for whether you're in from a criminal point of view or a civil point of view, and also working with people who've been greatly affected by trauma throughout their life. And I suppose the real question is how, at the end of the day, you can effectively take off this lawyer hat and step away from the often distressing, disturbing issues that you've been dealing with all day. And
it is tough. And I think, you've picked up on something really important, that is legal professionals. A challenge we face is in our training and legal education. We're not equipped to really understand and recognize the emotional impact the work can have on us. So when you talk about trauma, the experience, particularly for legal professionals working with vulnerable people who've had difficult experiences, and they've come to you to try and resolve that. Their children may be being taken into care, or they're immigrants to the UK and they're facing removal by, UK border agency or whatever it is, the Home Office. So that people are in a really difficult spot. They've come to you to resolve those problems. So that weight of responsibility, you'll feel it on your shoulders, but also listening to difficult stories regularly can have an impact on you. And we're not trained as legal professionals to how to understand that. We're very much trained to leave our emotions at the door, because the sense is that if we allow emotion to come in, that's going to cloud our rational legal minds and we won't be able to do good work. So I think it's about understanding that the work can have an emotional impact on us, but also, you were leading into talking about stress. And when you've had a busy, fast-moving day, switching off from that, I think it's really important to have boundaries in place and to stick to them. And I think lawyers are notoriously poor at maintaining boundaries, but recognizing that the time you need to rest and recuperate and switch off is actually what's going to help you go back to work the next day and do your best work, because you've had that downtime. And seeing it as that investment in yourself is going to be able to help you support others. And of course, an important part of that is, if you are really struggling, is to reach out and ask somebody for some help.
Yeah, no, and that's really interesting that you sort of finished on that, because obviously mental health isn't a sort of singular individual issue. It's something that we all have to be mindful of, whether that's when we are sort of managing ourselves, managing our time, and working with others around us. So I suppose my question is how can we all play a part in encouraging not only ourselves, but ourselves as a profession to invest more in the upkeep of our mental health?
Well, I think it's a collective responsibility to address mental well-being in the law. It's not one single person or individual's responsibility. So I think as individual practitioners, we have a responsibility to ourselves to look after our mental well-being, because we all know why that matters to us personally, but also professionally, as we've been talking about. I think organizations have a responsibility to be tuned in to the mental well-being of their employees and staff, and ensuring that they've got a sort of temperature check on that they're putting in measures that support people's mental well-being, things like regular catch-ups, that opportunity to sit down and talk to colleagues about work and what challenges you may be facing, because through those regular catch-ups, you actually build trust between people in organizations, which then means if someone is struggling, they're more likely to talk to you about it. And then I think professional bodies and legal educators also have a role to play, particularly professional bodies, in promoting best practice, sharing positive case studies of steps organizations have taken to support mental well-being. And I think legal education, which I know we're probably going to touch on as well in this discussion, there's a real opportunity in legal education to think about how we prepare younger people or junior people coming into the profession for the realities of life and practice. I think one of the fundamental issues that we face in the law, even though we're in 2022 and there's a much greater vocabulary and understanding about mental well-being, particularly in the workplace, is that stigma is still a huge challenge. And so the more we collectively talk about this, the better, because the stigma is what silences people from coming forward and talking about what's concerning them.
Just now, especially, it's quite hard to talk about these things without even briefly mentioning the pandemic, which has undoubtedly obviously had a massive impact to our mental health, not just as a profession, but as a nation. So I suppose now, as we see many organisations shift from a fully remote working environment to one of a more hybrid nature, I just wanted to know what you think the impact this will be from a mental health point of view.
What the opportunity we have now is to take stock and learn from this experience. What are the best things? What are the bad things? How can we take the what we know is a recognized need and desire from people for greater flexibility, but also alongside a desire of wanting to build relationships with colleagues, to feel part of something. And, we know at LawCare, we've had many calls to our support services during the pandemic, obviously. And one of the big challenges people faced from working from home was that social isolation, is missing the day-to-day interactions of, oh, did you see the football last night? What did you watch on Netflix? The chats we have when we make a cup of tea. And actually those micro interactions on a daily basis is sort of a bit like the glue that binds people together in an organization. And so there are challenges around perhaps feeling as connected online, or some people have felt that. So I think coming out of the pandemic, organizations have a real opportunity to think, right, if you are managing hybrid teams, how do you ensure that you build that sense of trust and shared purpose and values within a team? And I think there are lots of ways of doing that. I think really importantly, though, I touched on it earlier, is that regular supervision and catch-ups and making sure people are in touch. So I think there's great opportunity because we're now moving into a world where people can fit work in around perhaps other responsibilities that they have. I think it's an exciting new frontier, but I think the most important thing is for organizations to really consult with staff and listen to what they tell them.
Speaking about opportunities and change comes with questions perhaps surrounding a workplace culture. And as we begin to move towards a hybrid form of work, a workplace culture might actually become even more evident, and whether that's one that's overwhelmingly positive or one that's maybe a little bit negative as well. So I suppose what my question is if you have any tips or sort of resources for employers who are looking to improve their workplace culture.
Well, we've got on our website, we have got resources for organizations and firms around creating mentally healthy workplaces, increasingly more resources around culture. I think culture is an interesting one because there's a lot of talk about culture at the moment. And I think obviously culture in one organization is not the same as it will be in another. It's very much the identity and sense within that organization. And I think culture that supports mental health and well-being are organizations where there is transparency, there's openness, people feel psychologically safe to come forward with concerns or speak up with positive suggestions as well. And I think you build that through demonstrating that you listen to people when they raise concerns. A common challenge in the law that we hear all the time at LawCare is, I raised this concern and nobody did anything about it. And what happens in organizations, if you see somebody come forward with an issue and that you see that it doesn't get resolved, you're going to think, well, why should I bother to tell somebody about X? They're not going to do anything. So I think it's really important to create that sense that where there are problems, people see that they're dealt with and they're resolved. And I think the culture doesn't only come from the top, but that's an important part of it. It comes from the whole organization. And I think if you're looking at culture, I think the starting point is really perhaps some staff engagement surveys and asking people about the things that matter to them, that they value in the workplace, and looking at how you build on that and articulate it. I think increasingly people coming into the profession are going to be looking at organizations and thinking, does this organization look like somewhere I'm going to fit? And so I think being a positive culture is going to help you attract and retain people.
And I think just moving on slightly, as to another important point, obviously, in this matter, is the ability to sort of look after your mental health and your own well-being during especially busy periods. And I think often during busy times, mental health can often take a back seat, which then leads to obviously physically manifest. And I just wanted to know if you have any sort of ideas or tips on this.
Yeah, well, I think you've set it out really well. The challenge is when we're busy and under pressure, we chuck out of our lives the things that support our mental health and well-being. So rather than cook dinner, get a pizza in from Domino's, or I'm not going to go to football practice tonight because I've got to draft this agreement, or I'm not going to go to that family event at the weekend because I'm behind on my work and I need to catch up. And so we sacrifice the things that actually support our mental health and well-being. And I think it's about if there was a better understanding about our stress response and how our brains work, people would value that actually doing those things will support your mental health and well-being, which ultimately means when you get back to work on a Monday or the next day, you're going to be fired up and better able to meet those demands of you. And I think it's also aligned with the sort of general culture in the law. Perhaps it's beginning to change, but that we sort of thrive on being busy and a sign of having lots of things on our plate and having to get through them, that we see work as sort of an endurance event, and that our ability to manage all of that and be super busy and get on with stuff all the time is a sort of sign that we're really on it, we're great lawyers. But actually, I think we need to start flipping that and recognizing that professionalism is actually about working smarter and doing our best work in a way that supports our mental and physical health as well.
And you touched slightly there just on education and I suppose looking towards the future and sort of taking all that we know now and from maybe when you started in the law to now. So I suppose, do you see now, perhaps more than ever, we have this sort of opportunity surrounding sort of how we prepare and educate people coming into the profession?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just made me reflect back on my legal training. So obviously I'm a solicitor qualified in England and Wales, and I did the very last Law Society finals, as it was called, where I think we had to take something like 13 exams in the space of a week. And if you failed one, you failed the lot. And I still have an anxiety dream of going into the Law Society finals accounts paper, because I'd left accounts revision to last. Obviously, we've moved on a long way since then, that this sort of focus on passing exams. And I think there's two aspects of this. I think it's one about how we educate lawyers in the, what skill sets are we looking for in the legal profession? With the rise of AI and online tools for the law, that your ability really is about how to apply the law, how to interact with clients, how to collaborate and communicate. Just passing exams and doing really well in them is not necessarily an indicator that you are going to be a great lawyer. So I think there's thinking to be done around how we equip people with the skill sets, which are often seen as soft skills, but actually they're not really soft. They're essential skills: empathy, emotional intelligence, all that kind of stuff. So I think is equipping people coming into the profession to recognize there will be times when it's busy. That also feeling empowered to speak up. It's really difficult at the junior end of your career to challenge the status quo, and also to put your hand up and say, I'm struggling, because you'll feel it may be a career limiting step. And also seeing that looking after their mental well-being is really part of their professional identity jacket, that actually looking after yourself is going to help you do your best work and navigate all of this.
Well, it's been absolutely great to talk to you, Elizabeth, and there's definitely a lot of massive issues that we've covered. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. We really value your insight.
That's great. Well, thanks very much for having me.